Hello and welcome to Future Review. Today I'll be sharing with you part 2 of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. And as usual with book reviews, spoiler alert. If this is a problem, please leave the video now. You have been warned. And with that, let me start with the first topic that I'd like to talk about from The Time Machine, that obviously being time travel, the main point of the book. And before I talk about the mechanics of time travel that struck me in the time machine, and if it's possible in the future, I'd like to take a sidetrack to talk about H.G. Wells himself, because the way H.G. Wells describes time travel in the book is incredible because it's so accurate. H.G. Wells in the time machine describes time as another dimension, like length, width, and height, the three physical dimensions, which is incredible given that the time machine came out in 1895 and Albert Einstein's formalized the theory of relativity in 1905, a decade later. So the fact that Wells was able to predict that with almost perfect accuracy is it really just shows how brilliant Wells could be. And as I do further books with Wells, you'll see this in action again and again. You'll see the breadth and even depth as to what he managed to predict. So I just wanted to mention that first, that this is one of Wells's best predictions, in my opinion. And as for time travel itself, is it possible? Maybe, I would say, according to the Einsteinian understanding of the universe, assuming that it isn't overthrown at some point in the future. And assuming that Einsteinian physics is more or less true, then we know that there is no space and time. There is a four-dimensional space-time that makes up the universe. And then I'm going to get into some quantum mechanics here. I'm not a physicist or a quantum physicist at all. And Feynman's quote about if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics is very applicable here. But my idea was this: if we know that time is another dimension, like length, width, and height, and we've recently gotten into studying subatomic particles in quantum physics, and we've come up with ideas that maybe subatomic particles are the real root of all physical properties, including the dimensions themselves. If subatomic particles and or the interactions between certain subatomic particles are responsible for length, width, and height, then perhaps there is a time particle or an interaction of subatomic particles that causes time as we know it. So maybe we, and also another thing to think about is that with quantum mechanics is that maybe our entire idea of time itself is limiting us when it comes to time travel, because another thing about quantum mechanics that a lot of people have heard of, one of the better known concepts, is superposition, the idea that a particle, a physical particle, can actually be in multiple locations at the same time. And so my idea is, what if a particle can be in two simultaneous locations because of superposition, what if a moment can exist at two times simultaneously as well? I don't think it's so far-fetched given the idea that time is a dimension like length, width, and height. If if particles can exist in superposition, then perhaps there is a super moment as well. And I'll probably make this into a full video at some point because this is a very interesting concept. And so I'll leave you with that food for thought when it comes to the actual mechanics of time travel. And also because I can't describe it that much more because, as I said, I'm not a physicist. I don't really understand the concepts deeply. And with that, let's move on to the second topic that I'd like to discuss from the time machine, that being human devolution. In the time machine, the time traveler meets two species, the Eloi and the Morlocks, and both of them are a degraded form of humanity. They've regressed from what their ancestors used to be in their own way. The Eloi get a lot more screen time or a lot more time described than the Morlocks, but even the Morlocks, who still maintain their machines, are still a lot like apes. But it's the Eloi I'd like to focus on because they get described much more. The Eloi, as the time traveler theorizes, are essentially the result of a lack of selection pressure, as it's known. And this is classically Darwinian because Wells believed in that theory, and it's important to note that, as I said before, the Time Machine was published in 1895. Darwin's theory was only a few decades old in the public consciousness at that point because Darwin published it in the mid 19th century, and so it was much more radical and new at the time. And so Wells is operating off of a more pure version of the Darwinian theory than what we actually believe today. And this idea that the Eloi are degraded because of a lack of pressures from the environment is very much Darwinian. And from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense, actually, that the reason in Darwin's theory, humans and all species evolve because of pressure from the outside. That's what natural selection is. The environment has certain characteristics, certain traits are thus selected for because they're advantageous for the environment, and through a great deal of time and statistics, evolution occurs. The species changes to adapt to its environment. And so given that, it is reasonable to assume that if selection pressure that had been applied for a long time was suddenly removed and was not there for a lengthy period of time, then the statistics would change, and so continual improvement would no longer be necessary, and so you could get stagnation or even regression, as in the case of the Eloi, who have completely conquered their environment and have absolutely no challenges, and so there's essentially no selection pressure. Or, as the time traveler theorized, there's actually a reverse selection pressure where strength and intelligence cause more problems than not, and so you regress, you become smaller, weaker, and dumber. And that's possible. That is possible. That is actually a question that has come up even in modern times as to whether we have too few challenges and whether we're not what our ancestors used to be because of that. And and in the future, it may be a good idea to actually, as astronauts do in space, exercise, put artificial struggles onto ourselves to ensure that we don't devolve. Because that's what struck me about the Eloi in the Time Machine. And that brings me to the third topic of that struck me in the Time Machine, that being the progress of industrialization. You see, the reason that the time traveler comes up with for what conditions actually caused the Eloi and the Morlocks to become separate species in the first place is industrial condition. The Eloi and the Morlock are exacerbations of industrial class differences. But this is where I disagree with Wells, because while it makes for a good plot justification, this is absolutely, in my opinion, impossible in real life because industrialization will never progress that far. Even now, I don't think industrialization is really the driving force in human civilization anymore. And I think computers and information technology have taken over that role. And to a certain extent, more characteristic of developed societies and developed nations. But I don't think that in currently developing nations, when they industrialize, they're just going to keep doing that forever. I think eventually they'll reach their own industrial peak and then they'll go through a similar process to what we've gone through already. And so I think that in general, the world will go through its industrial phase and then it will move on, just like it has with every other system in the past. I don't think that will change much. And so this is where I disagree with Wells' characterization of industrialization as lasting forever. And that just about concludes everything I found interesting in the Time Machine. If you enjoyed that, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next video, goodbye for now.